you got to run into the unknown. Like what you don't know, what you can't see, what you don't know, that's where the treasure lies. It truly is.
This is some hokey pokey stuff.
I've never met you before, and I feel like, man, you should be on like Rogan's podcast. You know, I'm starting to get like some Gary Brecka, like Mark Hyman vibes from this conversation. It's like,
I was like, okay, this is the pharmacist of the future.
You know, people don't want to pay a price for something, right?
Yeah.
And so they perceive the price of like a program.
Mm-hmm.
And then they forget about the opportunity cost, the price of like trying to learn it yourself and how much time that must take.
Yeah,
and then, you know, not getting the answer faster. I'm a person where it's like, I want to find who's the best or who knows a lot and pay the premium to get the answer sooner.
Mm-hmm.
Man, I couldn't have been more wrong.
Welcome back to the Money Medicine Podcast, where we discuss strategies to grow your healthcare business, tools to accelerate that growth, and how top practices and pharmacies are executing and winning. All right, we are back for episode number 18 and kind of putting a little string together here of guests. And again, today we are joined by a guest, this time brought to us by my co-host, Logan Morse. And so, Logan, I'm not even going to pretend to get into the introductions of Rob and all that he is, your context, your background. I know this was a guest that like immediately came from, you know, to mind for you, and you wanted to get on the podcast. So I'll kind of let you introduce him and help everyone get to know Rob a little bit.
Absolutely. So Rob is the owner of Longevity Publishing LLC, as well as www.functionalmedicine.com. He's a functional medicine educator, mentor, coach, and guide. He is the godfather of functional pharmacy, shifting perceptions into a new paradigm of medicine. He's the creator of Beyond the Labs, which is a clinical and lifestyle protocol for wellness, cohort, and mentorship. And he's a practitioner and men's health director at Soul of Medicine with K Corpus. And Rob, super excited to have you on here. You were actually one of the first people, and I don't know if you remember, but you were one of the first people to ever talk to me about supplements. And I remember, so this was back at PGPA, and I don't remember how we got on the topic. We were talking about our Jeeps at the time, and then you were talking to me about, I think, about magnesium. And I was like, man, magnesium, you know, fresh out of pharmacy school. It's like, magnesium is magnesium. Doesn't matter what kind you take. If it takes it, it works, whatever. And you're like, no, like there's certain kinds that work better than others for certain conditions. And I was like, this is some hokey pokey stuff. And it's funny how now, like, I look back on that day and a lot of my interactions with patients after that, I'm like, man, I couldn't have been more wrong. And, you know, for me, I think a lot of pharmacists think that same way to this day. And they can learn a lot about functional medicine. And I think you're a great vocalist for functional medicine. So super pumped to have you on today.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you. And I think back in those days, I was a little more apt to be on my soapbox. So I probably annoyed the living out of you. So, and I just edited that one for you also. No worries.
Well, it clearly stuck regardless of maybe whether you would have the conversation a little bit differently today. So, you know, glad that actually, you had the conversation.
Yeah. And I think what you said, that's kind of poignant. So that's good. Yeah.
Go ahead, Chris.
We didn't miss any of the accolades and kind of the overview, right? To be clear, I mean, it was a little bit of a laundry list, but we didn't miss anything, did we?
No. I mean, you know, it's a lot of stuff goes on. Let's see, I regularly teach CEs at PharmCon or freece.com. I've created a integrated pharmacy specialist certification, also a food to pharmacy. Actually, Rite Aid bought into it, which is kind of cool. It kind of told us something about the industry. So I teach regularly there. And the interesting thing with them, I've been teaching there for, 8 years, 9 years. I used to have hecklers in the crowd, you know, pharmacists like, where's the placebo control, blah, 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 blah. And I'm sure I just probably aggravated a few. But the fact is, right now, it's just pharmacists are so engaged into it. They'll come on to it, be like, you know, I just needed a CE and oh my God. So there's something out there. This has been a slow growth, but a consistent growth. Logan, I know you're you're familiar with Pamela Smith.
Right.
I had her, I used to have her physicians work out of my pharmacy back in the early 2000s. And, it would have been 20 years ago. She talked to my pharmacy saying in 20 years, functional medicine will be the main form of medicine, which it isn't yet, but we've had tremendous strides. So as far as accolades, I'm just very active in it, from teaching, educating, and running a very active practice with my partner, K Corpus MD, as well. So
What's funny is actually one of my pharmacists who I used to work with before he retired, he's like, have you ever heard of this Robert Kress guy? He does like the CE. And I was like, no, yeah, I know who that is. I used to actually, I've worked with him a couple times. And it's so funny how the world works like that.
Did Larry retire?
So Tom Magnifico retired.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, he told me, he was like, man, this guy's sharp. He like knows a lot about functional medicine. Like, you should watch his stuff. And I was like, yeah, he's the one that first like kind of told me about it. I wrote him off that day.
Nice.
But funny how that works. So
yeah,
how
podcast?
Yeah, now you're on the podcast, right? So what really got you into functional? Like, when did that happen?
It probably happened. It happened during pharmacy school, even before it was called functional medicine. So I never went to pharmacy school for the normal, I want to help people, but I don't want to touch people. I kind of went to pharmacy school because I'm really good with people. I enjoy working with people, and we had influences, friends of the family that was, owned a pharmacy. So I thought, okay, I could travel with it, and I've lived all over the country with it, which is cool. But I was never kind of medication, I guess you could say. And when I got out of pharmacy school in '94, I was working for a CVS pharmacy, and it was literally the household dog was being put on Prozac. Like, the drug pipelines were, it's not like today where they've kind of dried out and they're just looking at vaccinations, right? But the drug pipelines were just churning and churning and churning. And it was just kind of chaotic. And this is outside Philadelphia. So I knew that wasn't for me. And what I did was, right when I got out of pharmacy school, I got the Michael and Leslie Tierra East-West Herb course. And this is when you would get on a course or a class and they'd send you a binder, right?
Oh, really?
And then you'd read it and you'd listen to the tapes and then you'd write it out and send it to them. So that got me into like traditional medicine, Native American medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine. So that kind of lit the fire within me. Like, okay, there's complementary ways to approach people. But then the biggest thing, honestly, after that, I went far to the other side, and it was complete energy medicine and mind body. And I love your question, because most people in functional medicine have that story, that reason. They were let down by the system. They had something that couldn't be fixed until they went on their own course and discovery, and they found it. And then they realized it was a complementary approach, because that's what functional medicine is, right? It's not saying anti this, anti that. It's like, what works for the patient? And let's get this communication going with the patient. We are co-creators in the process. So for me, I was a low back pain person, right? Because my family had it and the belief system gets in there. I moved out and basically dropped everything, headed out west, lived in Jackson, Wyoming for the better part of a decade. And I ran a pharmacy there pretty much just to hike and snowboard. I mean, it was a good life, but there was nothing rewarding about practice except being in the community. Jackson Hole, the town, amazing community. So I'm really grateful for that. But I kept going, like I was learning things like medical intuitives, energy medicine. I got certified in Reiki 1 and 2. So I was like on that side of it, and how the mind affects. And I came across Dr. John Sarno, and he wrote a number of books, Healing Back Pain and the Mind Body Prescription. And with my back pain, I just hung on to that identity. And if you can imagine living in a quintessential ski and snowboard town, it was 1998. The season was amazing. And I was basically went for surgery in the winter time. So I was just basically taking my dog on cross country skis while I see everyone's enjoying the mountains. I'm like, what is going on here? So, but I thought the problem was fixed. So 6 weeks later, I was itching, talked to my back surgeon. It's like, I got to get out there. So I got back on it, and she thought it was way too early, not a wince of pain. Everything was fine. No problem at all. Then we go to Costa Rica for about 3 weeks. And if you've ever been there, and if you're just trekking around the country, you can beat your back up pretty good. You could put stress and strain on it. Not a wince of pain. So in my mind, I'm like, this is great. I got mobility back. I'm feeling great. I'm feeling strong. Came back to Jackson Hole, walked into that pharmacy that I let run on autopilot for 2 to 3 weeks. And then pain right down my sciatic, right down my leg, dropped me to the floor.
Wow.
Well, so I realized I'm like, who's that guy? Dr. John Sarno. Grabbed his books, and it really told me about the psychosomatic experience. So if you go all the way back to, practitioners like Carl Jung, Freud, and some of the greats, there is a direct connection. And they basically took it out the DSM manual that there is a psychosomatic response. So that, long story short, that's what got me on my trail to it. But then I'm like, wait a sec. I can't be talking to people saying it's all in your mind, or it's this subconscious thing that, it's your fault. It's this conscious thing that you're creating. So fortunately at the time I had a technician who actually, she was a student and she went to PCCA. I was kind of making my move out of Jackson Hole, and I was like, professional compensation, what's that about? Right. So it's the whole art and science of pharmacy. So I'm like, this kind of sounds cool. Ended up in Asheville, North Carolina for about a year because we're just trying to figure out where to go. Let's get closer to family. And I ran into Bill and Mike at Nature's Pharmacy, and they basically had a pharmacy that I latter created. It was just all supplements and compounded. So I'm like, I got to do this. Flew out to Texas, got the PCCA membership. Then I ended up in Michigan. Thus, we had friends and family there. That's how I eventually knew you. And basically, on a whim, put up a pharmacy. And then my first step into it was CCN. So through PCCA, I learned about the CNCB board. So I got my certification in clinical nutrition. Fortunately, the first module I went to was Jim Lavelle. It was module 3. And if y'all know Jim Lavelle, he just lit me up. This is what I want to do. He's very passionate about, his practice. So it kind of started from there, and then it allowed me to get a little weirder. So I got into kinesiology and muscle testing through Premier Research Laboratories. I ran that clinic in my practice while I had IFM physicians work out of there. Dr. Kerry Tapuzian, who's in Michigan, Tim Drinkard, he was there. I don't know if he's even still practicing, but it was great to have them on board. So I would have these practitioners and we would just be like throwing stuff off each other's brain because we're all learning different pathways. I'm talking about muscle testing, they're talking about P testing, and, we're bringing it all together. So long story short, it went from there. And, then that pharmacy I got sold in 2008. So I've just been doing it since.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
It's incredible how, you go from that one aspect of saying, hey, maybe this might work. And then all of a sudden it just opens up all these other doors. Just fascinating.
You got to run into the unknown. Like what you don't know, what you can't see, what you don't know, that's where the treasure lies. It truly is, because my practice has come full circle. We're talking about mind body regularly with our patients now. So it's functional medicine that gets them in the door, but now we're taking them to the next step. And I never thought I would be here. So that's pretty cool.
That is awesome.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like, I think a big thing, it sounds like, to your credit, that's panned out for you is just your desire, I guess, and curiosity, in terms of continual learning, right? Like, I think a lot of times I see analogies to even in business where like you believe a certain thing and then you get exposed to new information. It sounds like you probably just went on this constant path of like, almost bouncing off of different walls, but eventually the information starts to click and there becomes a little bit of a tighter vibration. And now it kind of is much more clear in some ways of how everything connects. But, initially it's pharmacy and then it's like all the way over to the other side. But eventually that teeter totter gets a little bit smaller and it allows you to, be a little bit more probably concise, maybe not to put words in your mouth today in terms of how they're all connected and how you can leverage different, pieces of things that you've learned over the years to ultimately help a patient.
And you can only look at that, like what Steve Jobs said, you can only connect the dots looking backwards. And it's true.
Yep.
You don't know, so you got to embrace the mystery. And what you said, like being a consummate learner is one of the really core factors of a good practitioner. Kerry Tapuzian, Michigan. I mean, he's always learning new stuff, and I still keep in touch with him. So that's what you're looking for in a practitioner. And if you're a practitioner that wants to get into this, that's one of those qualities that hopefully you engage into. So, yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things I think about a lot of like pharmacists, and there's even a lot of medical practices that we see these days that just aren't actually practicing, not only functional medicine, but aren't looking into alternative therapies or integrative medicine. What kind of opportunities do you feel like they're missing for their patients?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, I've gone to the point where I'm on this, like, you've got to know your audience, and functional medicine is not for every patient, right? So it might be a practice of patients that just want the prescriptions. They don't want to make the lifestyle changes. So for that practitioner, there might not be any opportunities, to be honest with you, but there might be, because in my pharmacy, the patients that you wouldn't think would be the ones, because they may not have had the cash to spend since we didn't do insurance. They saw the value in it. So you see some of the things that if you had a practitioner, it's like, I'm really interested in it, but I'm kind of afraid. Like, I spent years 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Some of the things to it, you can really gain some autonomy of freedom for a practitioner. You can go cash based. You can work with the patient with more time. So you can get back to probably the reason you went into medical or pharmacy school. Because how many of us got out and it's like, wait, I don't get to talk to patients. Wait, patients don't want me to give them the side effects. They don't want to hear from me. But
Right.
now to this part where there's this relationship building. So I think that's probably one of the core factors that's out there. And if their current practice doesn't have the market, which I've worked with practitioners like that, you can open up to it. It's a practitioner that just wants to have that interest, that seed, that desire. So.
I think a big piece of it too is just actually having those conversations, because you don't know who's going to be open to it and who's not going to be.
Yeah.
When I was in Kent City, which is, if you're not familiar with it, town of about 1,200 people, I didn't think anyone would ever be interested. And this is, after I went through thinking I had dementia and it was just cortisol imbalance. And, I talked to Jeff Robbins, who, was like, hey, take these 5 supplements. I'm sure you'll feel better. After a month, I was like, oh my gosh, like something's changed. And, I started having those conversations with my patients, like, hey, you're taking a statin, do you ever have like muscle aches or things of that nature? You should probably take some CoQ10. And they started taking it and they're like, yeah, I feel great now. I'm not having, pain in my legs. I feel like I've got a little bit more energy. And it's like, if you don't have those conversations with at least just asking the patient and trialing on some of those smaller things, like, it's amazing what you can do for somebody.
Yeah, and that's great, because it's those initial conversations that open the door for the other conversations. So that one patient in particular could be like, so listen, is there an alternative to the statin? Is there a way I can get off it? Do I have to be on it forever? Right. So it can open up into all those, which is really great. Yeah. Patients don't know what they don't know either. Right.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, to your point, you assume that they won't be interested in learning more of what you have to say. Right. But again, until you have the conversation, you wouldn't know. One question I have for you on just this, I guess, multi-decade journey, if you will, is, partially like internally how you were thinking at the time, but also like, maybe reflecting, how did you balance, I feel like a lot of pharmacists, a lot of providers maybe are unwilling to maybe step out into some of these areas because, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but they like to have definitive answers. Like, they like to know and have more clarity. And some of this stuff, maybe there's a little lack of clarity, or they know that they're learning. So it's like an uncomfortable feeling of doing something new and stepping out and being unsure, a lot more than they are sure. How do you look back on those times where you don't have the decades of experience that you have now, and maybe fighting that internal battle of, wanting to help patients, but knowing you don't have all the, answers, but still willing to have the conversations? I feel like there's a lot of people that get held back in that, where they just aren't willing to speak up because they don't feel like they know enough.
You mean as far as a practitioner, like kind of freshly? Yeah.
Yeah. Like they see someone and they compare themselves. So like, oh, I hear Rob on this podcast. He knows all these different things. He talks to patients. I shouldn't talk to patients. I don't know as much as Rob.
Right.
Like, how do you fight that, or how do you coach pharmacists and providers through that?
I mean, the way I mostly work with pharmacists and other practitioners through my Beyond the Labs training. So it's actually designed for that, to gain their confidence and their confidence. So we're doing live patient examples all the time. We're running over labs. So they're starting to see all these different aspects and experiences. Because honestly, if I went back, if I knew what I knew now, I don't know if I would have been so, I don't want to say dumb, but like ignorant, just to kind of like jump right into it. Because I must have a high pain threshold, because, there is a lot of times where you don't know the answers. And, fortunately, I had a great support structure. So I had PCCA to call. Great support staff there, even if it wasn't on compounds. Premier Research Laboratories, the same thing. So, it's nice to have sounding boards to fall back on. It's nice to see the repetition. So, if, looking back now, I mean, I think the best thing is just to find yourself in a support structure where you can have more, keep the conversation going, immerse yourself into it, and know your audience, right? Because you might have a technician or a new pharmacist that you're working with that thinks you're a crackpot, stuff like that. So it literally is just, when I forget who said it, but they basically said, that's why we call it practice. Right? I mean, we're in practice because we're still practicing and we'll never get there. And I tell that to my students in my Beyond the Labs. It's like, I'm not there. I'm constantly learning. There's stuff I don't know. There's mysteries coming about. I mean, crap, like COVID threw a whole monkey wrench into everything and how we're treating people with mystery illnesses right now, to be honest with you. Right. So there'll always be, and then you get into the patient's relationships, you get into their, the environments they find them in. So sometimes it's putting a detective hat on. So it's just about being in practice and being willing to be open, and to sometimes like suspend your beliefs at times.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm still, I might get shunned in the comments or anything like that, but I'm still very on the fence of muscle testing because I just don't know enough. Right.
Yeah.
So when a patient's like, oh, I'm going to muscle test it, I'm like, go ahead. I don't know, I don't know how to really too much about it. So I'm always just like, yeah, that's fine. Like, do whatever you're most comfortable with.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's just like, I feel like it's always that unknown, and it's very hard for, at least I know for pharmacists, a lot of times to take that first step and even go in with an open mind, because my brain, my bias is like, no, that seems silly. That doesn't, like, why would that work?
Right.
And then you've got other people who swear by it, and you're just like, what would you tell to that practitioner who kind of, I guess, what would your first step be? Would it just be taking a course, or
you mean muscle testing, or?
Yeah, from, like, let's say muscle testing is a great example.
So for that one, because I think that is a great example, because that's really going the other way of thoughts, and I probably wouldn't have been so, like, when I came across Premier Research, the reason I came across them is Jim Levat was teaching. He's like, yeah, there's this guy, Bob Marshall, this hippie CCN guy that's got this. I'm like, okay, he's my type of guy. I need to learn more about this, right? So it's Whole Foods. I mean, when I first got my first shipment, I remember all the vitamins came in. I'm like, I found my hippie supplement company. So I was psyched. So it got weird for me, which I embraced. I like that because I'm just one that knows that, sometimes usually the answers are in the unknown. So I went to a weekend course, and that's what it was. You had to practice it to feel it. That being said, I absolutely get it. I mean, let's look at things like that. I mean, is the placebo effect valid science?
Yeah.
I mean, nocebo and placebo. I mean, you can literally believe that a doctor has a shitty bedside manner is not going to heal you. And it's true, right? I mean, they have plenty of studies based on that. So we know the placebo's right, and we know the nocebo's right. So I look at it this way. If a patient's sitting there and they're standing in the corner and it's pulling them forward and they're telling them it's going to work for them, that's that element of belief that I can't get in the way of. And that's very powerful medicine in its own right. So that's one aspect I like to say. Everything is medicine. So anything can be your medicine, but also anything can be your poison. So once again, that belief or that thought or that pattern, if they don't have an open mind, that can get them into trouble as well, if that makes sense. So I just find that incredibly, and it's very much, what got me out of retail pharmacy, I mean, I was pushed out. I should have been out a long time ago. I just decided I didn't want to be a vaccinating pharmacist. Like, that just wasn't part of my thing. I don't stand in anyone's way, right? And who would I be to try to talk someone out of it? Say if someone wanted a flu vaccine and then I don't get it for myself, but that's not my belief to impose on someone else. If they want to ask me my opinion and some facts, happy to give it to them. But can you imagine if I try to talk them down from it because of my negative beliefs from it, and then they went and got the flu because they didn't get it? Belief is a very powerful thing, and it's a strong molecule of medicine. So
it's well said.
Yeah.
It's well said. So, with your trainings and your courses that you teach, where would you start for example, I think for pharmacies, a big thing that they're missing out on is sometimes just selling supplements. And I'm not saying that like just to sell, but actually really benefit their patients, because there is a lot of, very easy core 5 supplements that they could promote to their patients and really help them out. How, what kind of, tips would you give that pharmacist who, doesn't really believe in it, is taking their first step and wants to make that change in their practice?
So they want to make the change, but they don't believe in it. Is there an aspect that they're looking to believe in it? I
They're
mean,
looking to believe, yeah. I mean,
okay,
they're looking
okay,
at it
Like
as,
maybe
you
they've
know,
heard all the noise. They've heard a lot of people
yeah,
having success with it, but it's like, I just haven't seen it. I haven't felt it,
okay.
or how
So,
do you help break their belief?
well, it's funny. I don't do that anymore, which is very interesting. So, I'm looking for people that are cooked, coming to me with interest, right? But I used to do that. So I think in that case, one, it's easier nowadays because they're seeing their competitors selling a lot. They're seeing the market off of Amazon. And it's really difficult to be a competitor to Amazon if you can't make yourself the obvious expert.
right.
Let's face it, Kim Kardashian can sell more supplements than any pharmacist out there, right? I mean, just
Mm-hmm.
anyone that's got that social influence.
Yep.
But if we've got a pharmacist that wants to, they're open, they're engaged. You have, like you said with the patient, you have the conversation. So I would really ask who they're seeing in their practice. And I'd probably use a really good example like metformin, right? How many metformin, like I might talk about the side effects people get with it, the GI upset, maybe some neuropathies due to the B12 depletion, but they think is a diabetic neuropathy, and actually say, look, we got this thing called berberine that not only can help with the insulin resistance, not only can help with the glucose and the sugar, not only can it can also lower triglycerides and help with their LDL. It's a metabolic wonder supplement, right? So when you combine that with diet, or I might talk to them about diet, and movement, and ask them about them. What issues do they have? So relatability is the key factor there. How you connect with anyone. It was very interesting when after we sold the initial level 1 to Rite Aid, Kay and I were out in Boise, and we stopped by a Rite Aid pharmacy, and I just wanted to go in, right? And then it was kind of funny because Kay's in it too. So in the level 1, I have her as because her and I have had we met about 5-6 years ago, but we were studying the same type of medicine in the late 90s and early 2000s, the same Carolyn Mace, same archetypes and all that stuff. And then when we met, it's like, whoa, you're weird as I am. And then she has a really compelling story. I mean, if you go, she has a TEDx talk, which it's your biography is your biology, which is so true. But we walked in, and then there's this one pharmacist. I was like, so what do you think about the course? And he's saying, well, they kind of forced it on them. They kind of made them take it really quick. And then he's looking at me, and he's like, oh, you're him. And he goes, well, I think they just want to sell more supplements. So it was to that point, they just want to sell it. I go, I get it. And I said, listen, I used to be a pharmacist in Jackson Hole. So we're in Boise over the hill. So he didn't know I spent 20 some years in independent pharmacy, community pharmacy. So once again, that was the relatability of a pharmacist overwhelmed, right? Doing COVID tests in the drive through, doing all this stuff. Then he was like, oh, and then it stopped him, and then the conversation happened. So it's like in copywriting or marketing, you got to find that hook, and what is the person going to relate to? But I would start simple. You talked about the 5 core, right? So that's a place that you can go. But then the step goes further. So if they really want to sell supplements, so one, helping the patient, that's beautiful because that's going to build a relationship. And if they can get their core stuff, especially with metabolic syndrome, right? I mean, look at all the drug-induced nutrient depletions from all the blood pressure medications, from beta blockers, right? From statin drugs across the board. Give them some magnesium when you get them feeling better. Right. And in doing so, I would suggest for them to kind of put their educator hat on. So first learn, but then become the educator and then teach your patients. So you're going to be a little different here, and you might be writing articles too, so they can see that you have that information. So that was a really long answer to your question, but
I think it's perfect.
Okay. All right.
Perfect.
Cool.
Yeah, I think it's really good. How big of a role do you think taking the supplements and feeling the benefit personally is to like the belief, right? Like, do you think it's harder for pharmacists to, stick their neck out and recommend supplements that doesn't take them themselves?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't talk to a pharmacy that wasn't actually the head of the pharmacy, that had the organization, if it wasn't a top down approach. If they didn't believe it and they didn't want to bring it into the culture. I had this in Southwest Michigan. As I told you, I always had 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and I was running the wellness program at a Martin's Pharmacy, which is a regional grocery chain. And our pharmacy was selling gangbusters, literally just some articles I'd write in the paper, and people were getting better. And that's where I really honed my just my quick recommendation skills. Like I can get you out feeling pretty good in 5 minutes, and it's possible, right? I mean, people are feeling so crappy. If you can give them that much hope, it opens up the vision of possibilities. So it opens up the world for them. But then the other pharmacies, they weren't holding on to it. They thought other things were more important, or maybe they were just overwhelmed. And then, I mean, I don't know if y'all remember, it's like back in the day, there used to be like Doritos bags behind the pharmacy counters. Like, you're just grabbing what you can eat. But I did see that change over the years. I think even in the pharmacy, there's a better, healthier mindset, but it's still an issue. And I do think if we're going to do health, we need to lead with health and the culture and the values of it. So there's a power and belief of the pharmacist trying to sell to a patient. How many times have we seen, hey, you can try it, but it's not regulated? I mean, you can walk by any pharmacy right now and hear those words,
Yep,
for sure.
Yeah.
And those are the same pharmacies from time to time that, wonder why their supplement sales aren't growing. It's like, well, listen to yourself talk. Listen to yourself talk about, I mean, would you buy from you?
Right.
And I think often the answer is no, but, that's a tougher pill to swallow that,
it's a
you're
lot
not
of
as,
yeah,
literally. Yeah.
Well, especially like, the pharmacy I came from before I got to Keystone, like we had candy right in front of our register.
Yeah.
It's like, you can't talk about health and wellness and then be selling candy and, have pop in your store. It's just like, you're saying, hey, don't do this. And you're also saying, hey, but you can buy some from me. And it's like, you really have to go, I feel like, all in and, firmly like walk in those shoe steps. Because like you said, and like what Chris brought up, for me personally, I try almost every single supplement before I ever recommend it. Now there are some that affects, the hormones that I typically don't try.
How's that estrogen doing for you?
Yeah. I don't need to mess with my own hormones. But almost everything that we're doing. I mean, I started taking some lion's mane and cordyceps the other day, probably about a month ago. And to me, it was like my first step into the mushroom realm because I didn't really believe in mushrooms. I was like, yeah, once again, these hippies out here, and by no offense by any means, but like are out here taking their mushrooms, find them on the floor, eating them. And then I started taking it, and all of a sudden my functional, my cognition got better. My anxiety from, a traumatic event went away. All of a sudden I had a little bit more energy, right? Because cordyceps chemical structure is the same as ATP without the phosphate groups. So it's just fascinating. And, so if you're out there and you're listening and you're a pharmacist or you're a practitioner, highly would recommend, practicing what you preach, but also taking what you preach and seeing the numbers and things of that nature.
Yeah.
It also makes for a really good connection story. Like, hey, I took this, here's what I felt. And that's what I always tell patients, like, here's what I went through. Like magnesium threonate's another great example. I always kind of preach about it, about how it's good for cognition. And I always tell I feel like my focus is a lot better, but as far as memory goes, I can't tell if it's helped my memory increase 10%, 12%, 7%, just being honest with them. And they appreciate that. And they're like, well, even if it helps me 5% and I recognize one more name, how would I really know anyway? I'm like, it's a great point. And so they like that honesty. And I think that's something that if you're in it to just sell, don't do that. Be a patient.
Yeah.
So for, your pharmacies or, I guess all the different businesses that you've been a part of, coming from the growth farm side, we're really big on, kind of marketing, said opportunities. And, our belief, if you will, is, there's a lot of people like yourself, like Logan, et cetera, that don't get the attention maybe that they should. And so we're trying to amplify their message, get them more attention. Then obviously, that will bring some opportunities. I guess, what did it look like, if at all, during the different businesses or, with the different businesses that you had of, maybe marketing, or maybe shed a little light on, some of the stuff maybe that you preach inside of your courses of getting more attention, right? Because I've never met you before, and I feel like, man, you should be on like Rogan's podcast. I'm starting to get like some Gary Brecka, like Mark Hyman vibes from this conversation. It's like, I've never heard of Rob before, right? And so I feel like there's so many people, not to like group you to others, but there's probably other fascinating, incredible people like yourself that could help a ton of people that just don't have the distribution. And you kind of mentioned Kim Kardashian. So in the distribution that she has to sell whatever, right? It could be dog water at this point and people would buy it, right? So How do you kind of feel about the role of marketing and or just like amplifying your message to get more of this out? Because I think so many patients would really tune into what you have to say if they just knew more about it.
I think as far as marketing, what I do teach to my students is it's relationship marketing, and that's where it starts. So, so first of all, we do a gradual step on that, and what does that mean? Could it be the obvious expert? Do we bring in the parables and the stories of how we can hook people into that? But personality plays a role. Communication plays a role. As far as avenues of marketing, I don't think there's any one perfect avenue. I think right now there's tremendous opportunity, and there always has been, for good old fashioned direct mail. I mean, mailboxes are empty anymore, and they always have been. We know a lot of people go to avenues such as social media because it's free. And I will say one thing, clicks do not equal engagement as far as if you're trying to sell a service with social media. Because I don't get a lot of clicks, but I get most of my clients from educational stuff that I put out there. So I think looking at an educational platform with relatability is the way to go. We want to know who the person is. Like you said, okay, like you probably know who Robert is now. Like you know who I am, right?
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So and then, it's that whole, for lack of a better term, no like and trust factor. So, once again, there's no one way. There are things I like people to try things to see what works and what doesn't work. Google AdWords is awesome, to be honest with you. If we're looking to get into, functional medicine has turned into a Google AdWord, a very expensive one, but people are searching for it. So we need to think about that. Right. So I do think Google AdWords is very helpful for someone trying to get their word out on their platform that way. Working with others, being on a podcast. My partner, Kay, she runs a women's practice. And a couple times what really worked for her was she did a live Instagram in my town here. It's called Newburgh, Indiana. We've got a bunch of women's boutiques here. So these women's boutiques, that's a culture in itself. So you look for other cultures that you can share with. Right. So we've got, this boutique is selling to the 40 to 60-year-old female, the 30, 60-year-old female. Well, gosh darn it, that's Kay's
That's
market,
your audience.
right? So, and they're very engaged. These people have 17, 25, 30,000 active viewers because they're really good on social media. So I would say hook up with people who know how to do social media and see if there's something that you can offer them to their clients. Right. It doesn't cost them anything, but it's a great service, and it just, it works for everyone. Because how many people are sitting there looking on Dr. Google trying to figure stuff out, but it's like, oh my God, here's an expert I can watch interviewed and ask questions to, So things keep changing, but I think the biggest thing is years ago, when social media was increasing, I was kind of a curmudgeon, right? And I was still, sticking, but yeah, I'll give you an example. So the direct mail thing, I do have a client who offers services to parents of ADHD children. So her services are, let me make your life easier. Let me look at your health. Let's look at this stuff. So what did we do? Well, I was like, well, find a community around you, because you can always buy a list of how many children are in there. I'm sure you can dig down to see how many kids are on Ritalin. But I said, find one of those neighborhoods where it's where they import all the kids to go trick-or-treating, because it's a huge ass neighborhood and there's usually children that live there. So you do a direct mailing there, and then we work with the things when they open it, boom. So that stuff still works as well.
Yeah. Well, I think to your point, kind of overarching message there is like, that I would preach, and I think you are too, is don't spend all this time and all this effort to like learn and then not give yourself in some ways a megaphone. Pick your kind of medium or kind of path, but like match the energy to learn and be able to help patients with the effort to get exposure to new patients and have the opportunity to then take that knowledge that you've spent all this time acquiring and refining to actually change some lives. Right. And so sometimes I feel like there's a mismatch from, I'm going to feed myself with all this education, get really good, but then no one's ever going to be able to hear what I have to say.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's the disappointing part, is there's a lot of that. And some people with the biggest megaphones, aren't as helpful, right? There's all these, kind of people promoting supplements that have, large audiences, or promoting different things, and they don't know a third of what, the two of you know, but they just have a bigger, distribution. So I think that's the sad part that we see all too common. I think to your point, being able to and being willing to experiment, you'll probably start to get some traction.
I think that's And I think that's a great point. And one thing I actually did a training on this, a course for my students. It's called Do What Lights You Up. And it really comes from Joseph Campbell. But the thing is, if you speak about it, if you preach about it, if you talk about what lights you up, there's two things that are going to happen. You're going to attract people that are in belief of the same belief, and you're going to detract people who aren't. That's a net positive. Because these that aren't, that's going to be a waste of time, energy, and you don't need to convince them. But these here that are so enthused and they're vibing on you, well, they're going to be your best customers and clients forever. So, yeah. So that is that megaphone. Use your voice. Yeah.
And I think that's such a great example, because it's kind of similar to politics in some ways, where I think we all have maybe a desire of like some non-polar. I'm not saying everyone has this desire, but I think some people would love to have just someone who's like, kind of a nice blend in the middle. But the problem is when you're in the middle, you stand for nothing. And kind of similarly to your point of like finding people that really love you and then find people that have no interest in your message. I think all too often practices and, pharmacies, they want to have a wishy-washy message that doesn't offend anyone and doesn't push anyone away. And therefore they never also attract anybody, because no one knows what they stand for and what they believe in. And so they just end up with a static, kind of message that blends in with wishy-washy content that no one resonates with and no one feels called to.
Well, the wishy-washy is in our DNA. I mean, that is like old school pharmacy. I mean, think about it. The little glasses, the hair. I mean, that's not modern day. That's not the pharmacists these days. We've got these kids coming out that are engaged, that are fired up, that are asking questions, that are really moving the needle. So, but I think that is imprinted in there, which is a very good point to have there. So, and, even for me, it's like I had to be very careful, and it's, I don't know, they're two different systems, but they should be able to communicate, I think is the thing.
Yeah. So Rob, when you're in your course, the courses that you kind of educate and you teach, I feel like a lot of times it's the unknown, what's really going on in the patient that, kind of scares us. And that kind of leads to offering like testing in like whether it's ZRT or Vibrant Labs or things of that nature, for a practitioner who's not familiar with that, where would you recommend starting? With what labs? I mean, you don't have to say what, I guess the company, but where would you kind of start?
Sure. So, I like one of the principles of functional pharmacy is that tests don't lie, but they never tell the whole story. So I think that's the important thing to recognize. So within that, if we wanted to get into a functional medicine type practice, what's the one common thing right now in society? The pervasive thing that's breaking people down, that's keeping people up at night, that's leading to inflammation, as my voice is going, stress, right? And stress plays such a critical role with all hormones. I mean, it's the great symphony. Cortisol can affect how your body's going to create your testosterone, progesterone, and everything like that. So the way I teach, and even in our practice, we've got core directions that we go with. So we go a very comprehensive serum lab. So we're going to step out a little different. We're going to get a complete thyroid panel. We're going to look for some homocysteine. We're going to look for some high sensitivity C-reactive protein. And we're going to do particle numbers. We're going to do LDL particles. This is going to tell the story. People don't realize you can look at thyroid and learn about their lipids at the same time. People don't realize the lipids are going to communicate with their other hormones. So you need to bring these together. So very core basis with us, it's going to be a comprehensive serum panel, as well as either a salivary testin, which is going to test hormones like a ZRT, which is going to test hormones as well as saliva, or possibly a Dutch, a urine metabolite test. So we're part to both of them. We use both of them. But now what we also do is we do a GI test. So we do a very comprehensive stool analysis. This one's from Genova. What's interesting, I've got a lot of students that are coming on board now that they're leading with GI. So whatever they're learning out there, they're seeing GI as ground zero, which is good, which is great. I think it just depends on the aspect, and it's listening to the patient. So I would at least look at these three core areas. But if I was to say what two areas, I would say adrenals, I would say hormones, and I would say serum labs.
Yeah, it's amazing when you, I just tested myself like a couple months ago. One, so I could have my own results. I was curious. And then two, so I could actually show patients, because a lot of times, you're discussing things with patients, you're learning about them. You're like, hey, are you stressed? What do you do for work? And they tell you this big, long history of like, oh yeah, I've had a really stressful job. I was abused as a kid or made fun of when I was in middle school. And then you're like, well, are you sorry? Like, how do you feel now? Like, oh, I have no stress. And it's like, I don't think you understand like what I'm really asking. And so I showed them, I show them my own labs. I say, here's what I'm doing. I have all these jobs, kids, wives,
I'm
dogs.
sorry, was wife's plural?
Yeah, I was
Wife,
gonna say,
sorry,
was that
wife.
plural? Yeah.
Sorry, wife.
Damn, Logan.
Yeah. Just don't tell my main wife now. And, I show them my cortisol, and I've got some hypercortisol going on, my evening and my bedtime. I stay up late, and it, affects, right, your melatonin and cortisol. And then I show them my DHEA, and my DHEA is tanked. And I go, there's the correlation. And then all of a sudden, I always tell them, like, if I let this go longer and longer, my testosterone's likely going to go down. And then, if you look at that, then you look at your thyroid panel, my TSH is a little bit elevated. And so you can start to make all those connections, and you did one test, right? And so, for helping educate patients, they start to learn like, oh my gosh, all these things are connected.
Yeah.
And I think that's really an important thing that practitioners can start doing, is really show them like, you're not just tired, you're not just stressed. Here's the whole picture.
And when they can relate it to how they feel, that's it. That's the embodiment. And that's one thing that I think it's so important that we constantly are talking to our patients about, and hey, listen, we're practitioners of it too. We're still trying to get it right ourselves. We got to get you out of your head and into your body. And it's how you feel, right? And it's that embodiment phase. And when you can walk them through their 4-point free cortisol and be like, boy, it looks like you're kind of waking up feeling a little sluggish, but you kind of gain speed around noon, but that's kind of like your highest in the daytime. And man, do you hit that wall at 2:00? But then it looks like nighttime as it rises, maybe you're a little, I don't know, wired and tired. And they're like, so now you got a captive audience. So yeah, it's powerful.
Oh, one of the funnest things I do, and I don't know if you've ever done this, but I've drawn someone's cortisol, like what I think it's going to look like. I say, this is what I think it's going to look like. Yeah. And then I keep it. And when I get the results back and I show them, I'm like, hey, look, they're the same.
That's cool. That's cool.
And so just because, they're telling you what they're feeling, like you said. And once you do it enough, I feel like you can do that pretty easy. And it can be really beneficial, because now you just blew their mind. Right. And now they have all this trust into what you're saying now.
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
I think that's a really cool thing to do, is offer those kind of testing services.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Rob, one question for you on, I guess, kind of your decades of doing this is, how was the interaction? What was it like in the beginning? What does it kind of look like now, with providers around, maybe do you have a pharmacy, to be clear? I want to
Not anymore. No, I sold that. Okay. I sold that back in 2008. So
okay, gotcha.
Yeah, we have a medical practice. Yeah,
gotcha.
Coaching practice. Yeah.
I'm sure you're still able to answer this question, but I guess, what did it look like as a pharmacist? You're starting to learn all these different things. I'm sure, especially back then, it probably wasn't as well received by other providers in the area, and so their patients come see you, they're getting advice or maybe getting some feedback from you. They're going back to the provider, and there's like, how was that in its early days? You're teaching all these different things that maybe the providers don't really, agree with or see eye to eye with. And then how does that kind of look now? Because I'm sure, maybe in some ways pharmacies are dealing with that, where they want to have these conversations with patients, but then they're getting pushback from the providers. And what have you seen work in time, I guess, in bridging that gap?
So I was really fortunate. I've never experienced pushback from a provider, which is a completely different story than most pharmacists that I hear. But I think it's because the relatability and the relationships that I made with my customers, and I wasn't shooting from the hip, and I was open enough and always would have that conversation with the provider, and I would respect them for their lane, because, Kay's an MD and I'm a pharmacist. We have some similar, but also different training, but we have different nuances and talents. So I respect her for hers and she respects me for mine. And it's the way I was with other practitioners. It's a line that I see is being blurred these days. I'm seeing states like Utah that's given complete prescriptive authority for pharmacists. And I think that's going to be a mess, to be honest with you, because you're going to have providers that are like, wait, you're doing primary care with my patients, right? And I know that's a whole hot topic, but I think before we go full guns blazing, we got to look at our medical community and, how we can work with each other. So I've always for me, it's been a natural inclination, and I just work well with others. Now, that being said, there's been people that have been disagreed with me, but I also feel that the patient believed it and they saw the results. So when they see the results, and I've heard that a lot, and Logan, I'm sure you have too. It's like, I don't really know anything about it, but you're getting better, so keep doing what you're doing.
Right.
So that's a common thread that builds trust. So then that practitioner doesn't think that you're just, selling snake oil,
Right.
So that's a really big factor right there. I do work with a local compound and pharmacy here. I used to do consultant work with them. They've got a lot of trust within the community. So the doctors, and now we're at a time and age, and this is all patient driven. Back in 2003, 4, when Pam Smith came to talk, we had over 70 people in the pharmacy. And I mean, that's what got the practice off the ground. So it was always, and I always said it was a patient driven movement, and it's now more so even. So, the doctors that aren't willing to do it, that's fine, but the patients are seeing through them, and that's not helping their connection either, or relationship, I guess I should say. So I just think there's, it seems better these days than it ever has, but I have heard those stories. And I coach my pharmacist to be totally transparent. What your goals are, working with the practitioner. They're that practitioner's patient, honor that, and this is how you want to complement it. So I think a lot of it is with that. I mean, I've had some write up introductory letters, who they are, what they're doing, what pharmacy they're from, because, they don't want to detract from the regular pharmacy business and have this doctor being like, I'm not going to send anything there either. So,
yeah, because you burned a bridge.
Yeah. So I think we've got to recognize that, hey, we're dealing with egos, personalities, hopes, dreams, wishes, and wants. So, we got to recognize that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I got another question for you on, in business, there's a guy that I really like. His name's Keith Cunningham. He's got a couple good books, and I talk about him all the time. But he talks about a concept called the dumb tax, which is more or less, how do you not make kind of how do you not make those massive, kind of financial mistakes? And kind of where I'm going with that is, I think a lot of people that are interested to hear this conversation, want to take next steps, could pay some dumb tax, in the sense of maybe, maybe reading some information, getting involved in some different groups, or just not having things kind of consolidated to where they can get, a lot of great information at one point in time. It sounds like you kind of offer that, but I do want to, kind of get some clarity. If someone was interested, they hear this conversation, they want to go further and learn about, the many different kind of areas that you have, where do you feel like the consolidated place or places are where you would say, if you spent a ton of your time, with these groups, this course, et cetera, that'd be a great place to start to avoid some of that, dumb tax of maybe spending some time learning about stuff you shouldn't or don't need to, or it's just not as digestible as some alternatives?
This is going to sound like the blanket easy answer for me, but if you're a pharmacist, it's beyond the labs. Because
and I'm fine with the plug.
Yeah, and I designed it that way because I
think if anyone listened to this conversation, they'd be like, "Yeah, Rob's pretty easy to learn from." That's my opinion. I'm not. Yeah. Again, I'm meeting Rob for the first time, but I feel like if I was to learn about this stuff, you're passionate about it, you care about it, you clearly have a lot that you're bringing to the table.
Well, and I paid a lot of dumb taxes. I paid a lot of dumb taxes in my years, so I completely get that, and I guess
because I think some people opt for we see it on our end where people don't want to pay a price for something, right?
Yeah.
And so they perceive the price of like a program, and then they forget about the opportunity cost, the price of like trying to learn it yourself, and how much time that must take, and then not getting the answer faster. I'm a person where it's like I want to find who's the best or who knows a lot, and pay the premium to get the answer sooner. So if that's what you have, plug away, because you'd be the person I'd be working with.
And my premium's less than a lot of other premiums out there, to be honest with you. So, I mean, this is what I would say. If someone wanted to be like, what's this about? I don't know if I'm invested in it. I don't know if I want to do it. I would say go over to freece.com, take level 1, level 2 of the functional integrated pharmacy specialist, get some CEs from it. You're going to get certified. Start there. But if this is something that you know you really want and you want to step into it, and you want to engage into it, you want a community of like-minded pharmacists that are totally green or actually totally veterans that have this social component, this community component, consummate learning. Like if you want to become kind of what I find is to be the perfect functional pharmacist, it's going to be at Beyond the Labs. And I say that unapologetically anymore. And that's just me with the results that we're getting, which is always blowing my mind. You know, I'm seeing these pharmacists that have been in it for 6 weeks, totally green, like, I'm going to start my consultant right now. I'm like, shit, I was 3 years into it and 10 grand before I did that. You know what I mean? So I like it, and it's the community sense, and we walk with you. It's the mentorship, it's the coaching. The biggest thing with all trainings have been you go there for the weekend, but what the heck happens on Monday? Where do I start?
Mm-hmm.
What do I do? Now, if someone wanted to go a little different, I would say go do a muscle testing thing. The reason I like that is not for the muscle testing itself, but it's going to show you how the head, the hypothalamus pituitary, works with the adrenals, works with the thyroid, works with the kidneys. You bring the GV20 into it. So it shows systems theory in the body, which to me that was probably the biggest thing I walked away from, because I don't muscle test anymore, but I understand how the body works and how it connects. So it's not an isolated object. So that would be another one that I would say. But, you know, in most cases, people are having to spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars for these big name certification courses, which, you know, if you want to, that's great. And at first I was like, I'm not going to create a certification out of my course. I didn't want to do it because my goal is to make everyone the best clinician and coach that they can be. And that's what it is. It's a bridge between clinician and coach. And I'm going to give them the science, but I also want to give them the human side of it and the implementation side of it. But I kept hearing people want that. So it is going to be certified at the first of the year. So I'm adding that to it. I was kind of dragging my feet over it, but I realized the value in it. And, you know, certification's only as good as the intention and the integrity that's put into it. So I'm kind of happy I took some time on dragging my feet as well on what I wanted to put together. So
yeah. That's awesome.
So
yeah,
thanks for the plug, but I didn't mean to plug.
No,
I'm fine with the plug.
Yeah.
Well, I think a big piece that I'm hearing is there's some accountability from, you know, working with that cohort. And like you said, you can go and you can do any weekend training. You can do a week-long training, a year-long training. But at the end of it, if you don't have that accountability piece, you know, it's even for like weight loss. I hear this all the time. Oh, I worked out for 4 months in a row. I lost 10 pounds. And all of a sudden they stopped.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you can do all that training, but if you don't know kind of what to do, or you don't continue to work on yourself and work on, you know, functional medicine practice, whatever you're doing with it, you just wasted all that money. You don't have anyone kind of saying, hey, here's kind of the next steps you should be working on, or here's kind of like,
yeah. And to add to that, if you're not working on your own shit, you know, if you're not working on your own victim mentality, if you're not working on your own past beliefs, that all plays a role in it. And, you know, when you said that, someone that came to mind is someone that that went through one of the big letter ones. He spent 10 grand on it. He got like a 100 on the final exam. Well, he's just pushing pills now, and he's blaming the system.
Yep.
And that, I don't care what course my course won't, I mean, unless you have people that'll work for you and address it. Right. So that's a big part of it. So accountability is absolutely huge.
Well, and again, I don't know even, you know, the extent of kind of your course, your program, and how it all works, but I'm sure you'd probably agree that even if someone spent a weekend, you know, learning everything that they could inside of your group, like that wouldn't be sufficient, right? So it's partially like the element of maybe what the information is, but then also like you just need time. You need like then opportunities to then interact with patients. Then you need, you know, those fringe things that you didn't get from your weekend learning to have resources to, you know, get alternative feedback. Like whatever it is, you're going to need, you know, a long-term kind of approach to it, because you're just not going to be able to retain all the information in 2 days.
No, true. And what I hope you would get out of that, like a weekend thing, and what I want to bring into every training is I want you to take a morsel or a seed that's going to excite you, that's going to take you to the next step. When I would come home from like my CCN training, especially if it was a teacher that would just be like that engaging, I was like ready to set the world on fire. And that just took me to the next step. So it's that momentum that builds. So that's huge. Yeah.
One question, because I feel like it's, you know, it's in the name of the podcast, and it's an interesting name almost in a way, because, you know, at the end of the day, we want to see patients, you know, get healthier, but also, you know, if you're investing in courses, you're investing in, you know, your time. I mean, you also want to make a return on that time, you know,
Sure.
financially. You know, could you speak to a little bit, whether people that go through this program or even yourself, of like, so, you know, some of the financial opportunities that opened up by being able to be a better resource for your patients, and maybe the increase in supplement sales or the increase in, you know, consultations and other services that, you know, opened up as a result of, you know, this pursuit?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I think anyone, if they get into such endeavor, I want it to be a professional and a personal quest, right? So we're growing ourselves personally. So not only are we better for our patients, we're better for ourselves, we're better for our family, and we're better for our community. So we have a lot of ahas that I'm seeing with these patients that these students that I would bring some stuff out and they'd be like, wait, you want me to do what? Like, what's this little exercise you want me to do? But it's impactful. So now if we're talking about straight dollars, so I've had a lot of different practices over the years. So I had straight one-on-one consultant. You sit down, and this is even before, the patient intakes online. So, I had tons of files in my pharmacy. Sure, it wasn't HIPAA safe. Someone could have walked in and grabbed it, but whatever. So, writing down questionnaires, all that's advanced. So that was a one-on-one. But one of the challenges, that's an old system, is getting people back. So that's where I found the kinesiology and the muscle test. And so having some type of test and element is important, because you're giving people some measurable markers to look at. So muscle testing was immediate. And that's what I loved about it, because they could feel if something made them stronger, could feel if something made them weaker. So that was very lucrative for me. That I just got tired of the direct one-on-one working with people. So then after, back to point and shoot and stuff like that, right now, I just think it's such a solid approach is to do a coaching practice for the patient, for the practice. Because a patient isn't one-off. A patient has someone that's walking along with them for a 12-week, for a 16-week program. And that's actually my challenge to my students this week. It was like, okay, I don't know if this is your goal, but if it was, what would your coaching program look like? So I had them answer 10 different questions. So it got them thinking in different ways. So it's, what do you offer them? What's included in it? What's the price? So it's going to be cash-based. Right. So we're not going to be stuck by the realms of the PBMs or the insurance companies. We're able to work with our patients. So they're actually getting feedback. They're hearing back from us. We're having testing involved. We're having supplements involved. And it's designed in a way where you build a relationship where then you can bring them into continuity. So that being said, if you want to hear numbers and dollars, it just depends how it's put together. You could have a coaching program that's $3,500 that might even include 2 functional medicine tests to it. Right. So it's like these tests are included. You can even include their supplements with that and still make a 50% profit. Right on that. So then it's, how are you going to structure it? Are you going to bring people in? Because a lot of it, people have to realize their time is an expense. Right. And you want to have all this in place before you put the shingle up, because then you're forever going to be playing catch up. We switched our EMRs over and now we're playing catch up in that realm where we didn't think we were going to have to. So it's just one of these, things bog you down. So time is an expense and people need to understand that, right? Because that brings your dollar per hour down. But when I build programs with practitioners, I try to average them out at $250 an hour of your time, however that looks. So, that would look at initial consults. Then you've got these mini consults, right? So you might just be meeting with them for check-ins for 15 minutes. They don't need a full hour. Or maybe you can even bring a health coach in that you can pay that you can do that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the big thing about, kind of these programs that you're helping people implement is, you have control over the price that you charge, what's included. And I think if you look at pharmacy, there's so many aspects that are out of your control, and it makes it very, very hard to market and grow, because, if you kind of take a look at the ways to grow a business, you can get more patients, you can get them to pay you more, and you can get them to pay you more often. And with the prescription model, you can pretty much only get more patients, because you can't upsell them on how frequently they take the prescriptions, and you can't upsell on the price if it's, again, not cash based. So, you're really limited on improving the financials of the pharmacy. And that's why you hear so much about new patients, because that's the only lever you can throw with that business. But if you have this coaching business or you have supplements, there's a lot more control. And I'm sure, people that go through your program feel this as well. Your total addressable market much bigger. I'm sure they're doing remote consultations with people, local, people online. with a pharmacy, again, with licenses and all that stuff, I mean, you're limited in so many different ways.
You are.
So I think what you do, a lot of pharmacies need to bolt on these types of programs, these types of services, because again, it's an area where they have control. And I think a business without control is a pretty terrible business.
Yeah. And be open once again to like I've got, in my own side, I'm starting a men's group, right? So a men's group coaching. So are we talking about medicine? No, but these are people that came in through functional medicine. So this is another profit center that's been created and a profit circle. And you know what it is? It's basically being a leader of a group and giving people space and holding space for them, basically, and talking about some core factors. So there's a lot of different extensions that it can open up to. I have one student, she's looking at starting a business women's group because she's a really good serial entrepreneur. And, her first goal was, I want to put together my functional medicine coaching thing, which she did. But now she's like, what's the next level? And she's even looking at things like, for her small community, putting a packaged food program together because she's really big in the anti-inflammatory diet and she wants people to be able to eat well. So, you don't know all the possibilities that can come from it, which is really exciting. And, depending your makeup, sometimes you get really bored with doing the same thing all the time. So bringing that new stuff in is really exciting too. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I got one last question because I know we're getting late here. So on our last podcast, we talked a lot about private labeling supplements. And so what I'm really curious about your opinion on when is the right time to maybe bring that within your practice to kind of have that as part of your brand.
I don't think it's branded. I haven't seen, and I could be wrong. I mean, maybe you've got some pharmacies out there where their client base thinks they're awesome. But unless you have unique formulas that are directly solving a targeted problem, I don't personally see the benefits in it. I really don't. I'd rather work on the brand of another big brand out there that already has a track record. So for instance, look at Pure Encapsulations and look at their product called Joint Complex. I've never come across a product that good, as far as inflammation, joint health and stuff like that. So am I going to try? So, and you got the Pure name, right? And other names, maybe I'm the wrong person to ask, but unless you're coming out with this targeted line that hits this targeted group, right? Men, women, 50, 60, golfers with, grandchildren, whatever it is that makes their life that better. I think it's a large investment to have 6 bottles deep of 24 different SKUs. But I could be wrong. I'd be really interested to be taught elsewise.
Yeah. So you've then never private labeled is what it kind of sounds like, or you private labeled bad experience, never?
No, I formulated, but I've never private labeled. I've seen people who have private labeled. So I've been consulting with people who have gone with private labeling of formulations that were already done out there.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't find that there's a true uniqueness in those formulas. Usually I could be wrong, but a 5-HTP is a 5-HTP.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, a B complex with a little bit of a Relora, and there's a B complex with a little Relora, no matter how you look at it. And there's, they could be a dime a dozen. So I could be wrong. If you've got, like I am thinking some big compounders out there that have been very successful. They've been doing it for 20 years. Their patients love them. They would never go elsewhere. They would buy from them anyway, would be my thought. I don't know if it's the thing that's going to make them buy more. But once again, I could be wrong.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
That's a controversial take for the podcast. With our experience. No, but that's good. That's good. No.
I like it.
No, you can't have a wrong opinion on this podcast. So okay. That's totally
I'm curious. I'm always good to learn more.
Yeah. We'll have to talk more about maybe showing you some things that we've been able to do. But
okay, I would love to see that.
Yeah. Well, I'll probably say it here for the both of us because I know we're getting long on time, but I really, truly enjoyed having you on the podcast. I felt really dumb the entire time, which is my favorite thing about a podcast because it means I have great guests, right? And I think this podcast is going to be really well received. I'm, again, grateful that, Logan, you set this up because again, hand up, had no idea who you are, but I think I'd love for you to have more opportunities to get in front of some people, because I think what you have to say is really good. And I think it's just
that.
the direction that pharmacies need to go and where pharmacists need to go. And so I'm not just saying that to blow smoke, but more so, we were recently at a large conference. I'll just leave it at that. And it was just, so many times I was walking, people were coming up and we were, meeting people, and it's just almost kind of sad in some ways, maybe the state in some ways that kind of the pharmacist and maybe their interest level in learning or doing new things or doing more than just filling prescriptions. So it's always refreshing where, we have a conversation with someone who's looking to do more and just further the practice or, further pharmacy. So appreciate you for being a trailblazer, because I'm sure you've taken some arrows in the back along the way. But I think, voices like you are needed to help, again, the next generation, because I think in some ways, some people are probably too far gone, but it's just making sure that the Logans and, kind of the younger pharmacists as they come up with this mindset.
They're a powerful group. And Logan, I'm so glad you're into it, because honestly, it seems like a functional medicine pharmacy, like, it's nothing against it. I think it's great, but the females are like lighting shit up. They're lighting the world on fire here, right? So there's a lot of room for this relatability of men speaking to other men for men's health, the stuff that men are going through. I heard even just words from you. We haven't talked forever, but you used the word past traumas. We've all got it, and there's this reality that's affecting us of who we really are, who we are for our families, our friends, and who we really want to be to find our authentic self. So kudos to both of you for actually opening up these conversations. Yeah.
Thank you.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
One last thing, Rob, if there are pharmacists, practitioners, providers looking to further their education, where's the best place to get a hold of you?
So you can email me, functionalpharmacy@gmail.com. You can always go to my website, functionalpharmacy.com, or Instagram or LinkedIn, Rob Kress, FRX. There's a Facebook page. It's mine, called Functional Pharmacy. I think it's linked. I don't like Facebook. It's always been too political and personal.
We'll make sure to get all the links. Make it easy for everyone listening.
Yeah. So you message me, and if you don't hear from me,
and
please message again.
Is it beyond the lab? Is that like a domain by itself, or is that
it's
kind of through?
Not. So that's thank you for that. That's actually at Functional Pharmacy. So if you go to Functional Pharmacy, you'll see a top thing that says Beyond the Labs. So yeah.
Cool.
Yep.
Again, I don't think this will be the last time we have you on if you're interested in coming back. But again,
I love it.
Thanks for hopping on.
Yeah. Appreciate
what you do.
Yeah.
And hopefully get to meet you in person.
Excellent.
At some point.
Yeah. Now, are you both in Michigan?
I'm down in Austin, Texas.
Okay.
Logan's in Michigan.
Okay. Cool.
Yep, I'm still in Michigan. Yep.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
We'll have to find a centralized place at some point.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, good to meet you both.
Absolutely. All right. For everyone listening, thank you again. This was episode 18 of the Money Medicine Podcast. Again, give us feedback, comment, like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and make sure to check out more of what Robert does. And we'll see you on the next episode.